Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I am glad you've joined me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can follow me on social media at P.A.S. Report and share this episode with your family and friends. Share it on social media. This is a very, very important episode because today I want to jump into the rise of socialism in America, and it's important for people to truly understand not only what socialism is all about, but why there seems to be so many Americans that are gravitating towards it. You know, last week I discussed the dependency crisis here in America, how more and more people are relying on government. And when we look at an education system, a failed education system, we see that too many people have been taught to believe that the government is the answer to every problem that we face, that we're supposed to turn to the government. And that's never the case. That's not what the founding fathers wanted. It's not what the intention was. And too few think that what happened with the election of Zohran, Mamdani, New York, you have Katie Wilson in Seattle, you have so many people on the right, Republicans, conservatives, that are saying, well, it's a blue state thing. They chalk it up to these cities being deeply blue. They believe it's a fluke, but there's a newsflash. This is not just New York being New York. It's not just Seattle being Seattle. This is something much bigger than that, something that is going national and something that's very intentional, I promise you. If people continue, particularly Republicans, if they continue to shrug it off, if they continue to mock it or downplay it, they're out of their minds. Because what we're seeing now is the opening wave of what's going to become a surge of self-proclaimed Democratic Socialists running in the 2026 elections. I guarantee it. You just had last week Mamdani walk into a Democratic Socialist of America event, and he said it's good to be home. He's not a member of the Democratic Party. And do you know what kind of message this sends? It tells every far-left activist in this country, you can win. That your far-left ideology is viable. Your moment has arrived. See, this isn't just about one city local office. This is about proving a national ideological blueprint actually works. And that's what Mamdani is trying to do. When we examine it, yeah, he played nice with Trump when he was in the Oval Office just last Friday. But they found a model, and they want to mass produce that model. And yet we have Republicans, including people who should know better. They roll their eyes. They act like this whole thing, it's just a fad. It's going to go away once people magically realize that socialism doesn't work. You just had Republicans pass a resolution condemning socialism. Really? That's your plan of attack? You know, you're going to pass some resolution that most Americans aren't even going to hear of and most people don't really care about? That's the amazing part. You have exceptions like Senator John Fetterman and Congressman Dean Phillips, so there are exceptions in the Democrat Party. You do have moderates and blue dog Democrats. They speak out against it, but most of the moderate and blue dog Democrats just shrug their shoulders. They remain silent, and they're scared they're just going to be attacked. Look at Schumer. He is the perfect example. Schumer was never this fringe ideological far-left person. He was a moderate, yet he's pushing the far-left agenda. Why? Because he's deathly afraid. He wants to maintain his power. He doesn't realize he's lost it. So you have so many people that are not, and it's not just Republicans. You have Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They're not living in reality. This is not a time that we should be complacent. Too many of them believe that we're still operating in 1990s political playbook. This is a moment that must be taken seriously. And if it's not, we're going to lose an entire generation. And I'm going to show you exactly why in this episode, because if you look at the data, it should terrify any sensible person. According to a Cato YouGov survey, this isn't some fringe poll out there, 62% of Americans under the age of 30 have a favorable view of socialism. I'll say it again, 62%. That's not just some small number. That's not people that just have this curiosity about socialism. That's a majority. And get this, 34% of college-age adults say they have a favorable view of communism, not just socialism. It goes far beyond that. A third support communism. And it gets even worse than that. When we just look at Democrats, those who identify as Democrats, 67% of Democrats, regardless of age, view socialism favorably. Now, when I say the Democratic Party is dead, that's exactly what I'm talking about. 2/3 of the party is now controlled by the far left. They view socialism favorably. They want to see socialism become policy in the United States. And it's not just Democrats, 38% of independents do too. So we're not talking about 500 people on TikTok here. We're talking about millions upon millions of Americans. That's enough to win elections. That's enough to shift the culture of the country. That is enough to dramatically change the country. Fundamental transformation of America is here. And if you compare this to just a few decades ago, when the overwhelming majority of Americans believed communism was the worst, most oppressive political philosophy ever created, now we have young adults who think communism is better system because they believe it provides this idea of fairness. And that should scare the hell out of every responsible adult in this country. So we need to understand what changed. How did we get here? And I want you to think back, especially if you grew up anytime before the 2000s. You know, when I was growing up, 1980s and 90s, growing up toward the end of the Cold War, liberty mattered, freedom mattered, American pride mattered, patriotism. It wasn't something that was mocked. Capitalism, it wasn't something that was demonized. And the American dream, the idea that you could build something through grit, hard work, perseverance, that idea was alive and well. Back then, if someone walked into a room and said, "Hi, I'm a Democratic Socialist," they would have been laughed out of the building. Politicians like Mamdani, like Katie Wilson, like AOC, Ilhan Omar, none of them would have ever been taken seriously prior to 2000s. Not even close. But now they are, and we have to understand that, and we have to understand why. Because the new generation has been raised on a completely different narrative for years. There's this narrative out there that they've been told that the system's unfair, that America is fundamentally unjust, that capitalism is the source of all their problems, that government not only has the power to fix their lives, but the responsibility to guarantee their success. They were raised to believe in this soft, mushy idea of fairness. They were never taught that life isn't fair and that no system on the face of this earth can ever make it fair. They've been taught that effort doesn't matter, that as long as you show up, you get a trophy, that struggle shouldn't exist. You shouldn't be uncomfortable in life, that if something goes wrong, there must be some sinister systemic force causing it. It can't possibly be poor life decisions that you made. Can't possibly be that. It can't possibly be life just being life. They were taught to be victims. And when you feel like a victim, what do you look for? You look for a savior. And that's what socialism presents itself as, a savior. But it goes deeper because I'm just talking surface level. If we really want to dig into it, this generation was sold a lie. They were told, go to college, get your degree, everything will be fine, that the only pathway to success is a 4-year piece of paper. They were told that this piece of paper equals purpose. They were told that success will magically come to them when they graduate. But what actually happened? Well, instead, they racked up a ton of massive student debt loans. They graduated into an economy with insane housing prices. They entered adulthood drowning in monthly payments, whether it's rent, car insurance, car payments, streaming services, credit cards, student loans, all of it. They were never taught to be fiscally responsible. They were told to focus on their careers instead of thinking about families, think about starting a family. And they were told that the American dream is dead. Now they have this sense of hopelessness, and people wonder why. They have more material goods than any generation in history, and yet they're more miserable than ever. And part of that is our fault, right? And when I say our fault, I'm not talking about you and I. I'm talking about just our society's fault. Because we've equated success to stuff. The more stuff you have, the more successful you'll be. The more successful you are, the more fulfilled you are in life. But that's not true. Stuff doesn't give us meaning. Stuff doesn't make us happy. Meaning comes from purpose. It comes from responsibility. It comes from having faith, being part of a family. All the things our culture has spent the last 20 years tearing down. And then people wonder, why are they confused? People wonder, why are they angry? It shouldn't be a secret of why they're searching for something to cling to, something that promises fairness, equality, a sense of community. And socialism seeks to fill that void. And I want to make it clear that this isn't just limited to Gen Z. According to election data, 66% over 30-year-olds supported Mamdani. 66%. 43% of voters aged 45 to 64 supported Mamdani. And even 36% of senior citizens over the age of 65 supported him. Those numbers are staggering. That's not a demographic shift. That's a cultural shift right there. This is where Republicans fail miserably. Instead of addressing the real concerns, the cost of living, the cost of housing, the student loan trap, the high price of healthcare, instead of addressing that and coming out with real proposals, I'm talking about conservative proposals, they dismiss the suffering under these burdens as if, well, these are just young, misguided liberals and they're just going to magically grow up to become conservative. You can't do that. You can't do that. You got to look at the facts on the ground. In the 1990s, the median age to buy a home was in your late 20s. Today, it's 40 years old. You think that doesn't change how people view the system? You think ignoring this will magically make voters come to their senses? And here's the big lie socialists love to push, that this is what happens under capitalism. They're blaming it all on capitalism, and there's a whole lot of people, millions upon millions of people that are buying it hook, line, and sinker. Well, guess what? The United States is not the most capitalist country in the world. We rank 26th in economic freedom. We are actually right above Qatar. Think about that. Countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, the ones that Democrats love to cite as democratic socialist models, they rank in the top 10, top 15. They are, by definition, more capitalist than the United States is right now. And in the early 1990s, we were ranked fourth. Now we're 26th. You have the owner of Home Depot, recently passed away, but he said if he wanted to start Home Depot today, he couldn't do that. We are less capitalist now than at any point in the modern era. And that is exactly why people are struggling. Not because true capitalism has failed them. The truth is, we actually failed capitalism. That's the truth. And if Republicans ignore this movement, if they ignore the attacks on capitalism, they do so at their own peril. If they continue pretending, these voters will somehow wake up and say, oh, wait, socialism is bad. They're dreaming. If Blue Dog or moderate Democrats, if they believe that a course correction is coming and they're going to retake the party mantle, they're delusional. That's not happening. This is a real ideological push. It is growing, it is organized, and it is extremely effective. And if we don't acknowledge that fact, we lose. If we don't acknowledge the pain people are feeling, if we don't present real conservative market-based solutions, if we don't fill the void, then socialism will. And it's only going to gain speed, because the real threat isn't just that socialism is rising. The real threat is what Democratic Socialists actually believe, in their own words, not my words, in their own words. And in the next segment, I'm going to expose that. But trust me, their platform will shock you far more than anything I say. So everyone, hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Make sure you follow and share this podcast with your family and friends. Post it on social media. It's such an important message. It's going to be a little bit of a longer episode than I usually do, because we're talking about something that is so important. In the first segment, I laid out the rise of socialism and the cold hard data showing how deeply it has taken root in this country. Now I want to turn it. I want to explain why it's happening, because if we don't understand the emotional, the economic, and the cultural forces that are driving this shift, you're never going to be able to counter it out there. You can't defeat something you refuse to understand. You've heard me say on this podcast a million times before, you cannot defend what you don't know. I always say that when I'm talking about liberty, when I'm talking about the founding of this country. Well, the same thing holds true here. You're not going to be able to defeat socialism if you don't really understand it, if you don't understand why people are gravitating towards it. Because I think that is key. Yes, we know socialism is bad, but it has fatal flaws. And people don't know those fatal flaws. But we also have to try and figure out why the Republican Party is ignoring what's going on in the lives of so many people, because that's their biggest mistake. Too many Republicans think it's just about ideology. They think young people are sitting there reading Marx, they're reading Engels, diving into theory, organizing underground reading clubs. No, that's not happening. This isn't really about Karl Marx. Most of them don't even have a clue what socialism is. This is about their life experiences. This is about what they're experiencing in the here and now. And unless the right learns to address the real struggles people face, socialism is going to continue to grow. Because socialism at its core, it's not selling a political philosophy. It's selling an emotional philosophy. It's selling relief from anxiety, relief from hopelessness, relief from economic pressures, relief from any and all responsibilities, relief from uncertainty. It's instilling a sense of righteousness, no matter how fake and shallow that righteousness is. And that's why this movement has gone mainstream. It's not relegated to the fringes that it once was. And Republicans, they're asleep at the wheel. They just want to, we'll pass a resolution. That's going to magically wake up all the American people. We passed a resolution saying how bad socialism is. And now the American people are going to realize how bad it is. Think about how stupid that is. Right now, Americans, especially younger Americans, they have the perfect storm. That's what we're facing. Homes they can't afford. Monthly payments that suffocate them. And yes, most of these monthly payments are not based on necessities. They're based on wants. They're based on desires. But they have them, and they're not giving them up. Jobs that don't feel secure, a culture that tells them life is unfair, a political system that feels corrupt and unresponsive. Has it not been? Home ownership, far away, not going to be able to own a home. Going to have to live with my parents for the next 20 years. Move out at the age of 40. You think that instills confidence? You think that instills confidence in the system, in the country, in the culture? This is a seismic shift in how people view their future. Imagine being 32 years old, college educated, working full time, and you still can't afford to start a home because the price doubled and your income's been flat. Imagine what message that sends. Imagine how ripe that environment is for an ideology that promises fairness and economic security. So you're telling me that someone that's actually doing the right things, okay? So I'm not talking about those that want to mooch off the society. I'm talking about someone that went to college at the age of 18. They graduated. They didn't go with the P.A.S. degree. They actually got a pretty decent degree. And they've been working. They're not seeing their income rising. They're seeing the cost of everything else rising. Think about it. You think telling them that socialism is bad is going to work? You think mocking them is going to work? Not a chance. For many, socialism feels like the only ideology that's listening to them, that's acknowledging their struggles, that's driving them towards a sense of purpose. And there are a number of factors for the discontentment. It's not just about home affordability. I brought up the student loan trap. You have so many young people caught up in these student loans. This generation was brainwashed that the only pathway to success in life was to take on massive debt, earn your 4-year degree. They didn't tell students to be smart about how much money you're taking out in student loans. They didn't tell them to be careful about what your major is in. In fact, they did the opposite. They encourage people to maximize their student loans. They push these BS majors that have no viable pathway to a career. Go to college, take out loans, you'll get a good job. It's going to pay for itself. So they graduated $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 in debt, $200,000 in debt. You have people entering the workforce. They realized the major was a waste. People having to go back to work as a store clerk in places like Target. And I'm not denigrating those professions. Those people work hard. They got to deal with annoying customers all day long. But you have so many young people can't find real jobs because their major was a complete joke, because they lacked discipline, because they weren't challenged, because we dropped standards, and their degree didn't deliver any type of purpose whatsoever. Now, while people do bear responsibility, they have to be responsible for the life choices they make, and they need to own up to the decisions they make. I can also understand why they're bitter and resentful. They feel blindsided. They feel betrayed. I get it. You can't ignore that. And the Democratic Socialists, that's where they see the opening. Just look at their message. It taps directly into that betrayal. It weaponizes disappointment. It says, you're not the problem. The system's the problem. And if you feel lost, if you feel lied to, the message hits, and it hits hard. You have so many people out there that lack any sense of purpose whatsoever. Sure, they may have more stuff today, but they don't have any fulfillment in life. Understand that this is the first generation in American history that has the most entertainment, the most technology, the most comfort, the most material convenience. Even the lower income Americans have more than an upper middle class family in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s. And yet, anxiety and depression are through the roof. We see the lowest levels of unhappiness. Why? Because those things don't provide purpose. Purpose comes from family. It comes from faith. It comes from being responsible, having discipline, taking risks, sacrificing, and accomplishing things. Not dopamine through clicks, not Netflix, not DoorDash, not TikTok. So we have helped to destroy our own culture. Socialism fills that void. We destroyed the meaning of our culture. No longer is it based on the American identity. No, that's bad. You can't do that. Well, how can you build a healthy society when the only thing people are taught is to value in life is stuff and convenience? No matter how misguided, socialism gives people something to believe in, something that has purpose. It gives them a moral mission. Now, I don't agree with that more. I'm not saying it's a moral in the real world. I'm talking about theoretical. What do they say? We're building a freer world. We're fighting injustice. We're part of a movement. We're the good guys. We're the anti-fascists. It's activism sold as purpose in life. Politics as identity. Ideology as a place of belonging. And this is why dismissing these voters will ultimately lead to a full socialist takeover. They're not drawn by economics. They're drawn by the lack of purpose they currently have in their lives. They're drawn by meaning. They're drawn by community. And outside of the late Charlie Kirk, what do Republicans counteroffer? See, Charlie Kirk would talk about the values of faith. He would encourage young people to meet others, to make friends, to hang out with others, to settle down with someone, ultimately start a family. All things that bring purpose in life. Not to buy a new flat screen TV, not to buy a nicer vehicle. What do Republicans tell people? What is the Republican message to Americans, particularly those that are gravitating towards socialism? Work harder. Toughen up. Stop whining. Don't expect handouts. Fix your own problems. And listen, all that's true. I'm not denying that. I say it constantly. But you can't sell personal responsibility if people feel hopelessness. If they believe that possibilities don't exist for them and the American dream is dead, it's hard to preach about self-reliance without offering a vision that's worth striving and fighting for. Right now, socialism is the only ideology giving people hope in their lives. Because, and it's so infuriating, right? Socialists, they blame all of today's economic problems on capitalism. Housing, capitalism's fault. Healthcare, capitalism's fault. Debt, capitalism's fault. Wages, capitalism's fault. Inequality, capitalism's fault. It's the big lie. And the data does tell a much different story. As I said in the first segment, the United States ranks 26th in economic freedom. You have the Nordic and Scandinavian nations, the Democratic Socialist European nations, as the left would say, and they praise those nations. But those nations are more capitalist than America, more free markets. They have lower corporate taxes in certain areas, fewer barriers to entry, greater economic mobility. In the early 1990s, America was ranked 4th in the world. We were one of the freest economies on earth. Now what? Well, we buried our markets under regulation and bureaucracy, government expansion. When socialists say capitalism failed, no, we failed capitalism. You want to see where socialism fails? Just look at our education system. Just look. $1.4 trillion on a failed education system. Over 2/3 of students can't do mathematics. Only 1/3 of students can read or write at grade level. Only 13% understand American history, are proficient in American history. 87% are virtually ignorant of American history and civics. Well, if you look at the education model, the public education system, should we really want to see that type of results in all the other different sectors that government will get involved in? But see, if you don't know, if no one on the right bothers to explain it, then the socialist narrative wins by default. And the part that no one on the left wants you to notice, while they point to Europe in their speeches, the system that they're actually proposing looks a lot more like Cuba and Venezuela. We're talking about things like state-run media, government-controlled industries, centralized public ownership of production. You don't hear the Swedes talking about abolishing capitalism. You don't see these nations empowering a ruling party to control the economy. But the Democratic Socialist platform does. The Democratic Socialists of America, they call for social ownership of production. They call for nationalizing key industries. They call for the abolishment of capitalism. They call for a government-administered media, a government-controlled labor market, guaranteed jobs that will be decided by the state. That's not Denmark. That's not Sweden. That's Venezuela. That's Cuba. The European model, they're able to do it in their countries for specific reasons. They might offer social welfare benefits, but they still accept capitalism and free markets as the driving force of their nations. What Democrats call democratic socialism has nothing to do with Europe, has everything to do with central planning, state control, authoritarianism. It's a bait and switch. They try and sell you Sweden, but they deliver you Caracas. And this is the core problem, because Republicans refuse to engage with the actual pain people are feeling. You can't ignore insane housing prices. The cost of homes has doubled. The cost of living has almost doubled. Wages are stagnant. Healthcare is a disaster. You have colleges that are unaffordable. People are dissatisfied. And what does socialism say? What did Mamdani say? We're going to save you. Now, what's the Republican alternative? Well, silence. Sometimes they'll be nostalgic about our past. Sometimes they'll have blind faith and they'll say, well, things will work themselves out. They say, socialism always fails. But do they really offer any solutions? Do they offer a clear vision? I want you to just think about this. They literally had 15 years to create an alternative to Obamacare. 15 years. Remember, repeal and replace. They voted to repeal it time and time again. Obamacare has been a miserable failure. But can anyone out there point me to a single piece of legislation that not only repeals Obamacare, because as I said, we've seen that dozens of times. Point to a piece of legislation that creates a viable alternative. And that's the problem right there. That's just one example. 15 years to do something, to put together a real plan, a conservative plan, one that empowers the people, not government. And we haven't seen anything. So when you don't have an alternative, when you don't have a vision, when you can't clearly articulate how to improve lives, it's going to open the door to socialism. People are going to grab onto that lifeline. And this is why socialism is spreading like wildfire. Not because people love Marx or Lenin. They don't. Ask anyone. Ask any 18 to 29-year-old kid. And I will guarantee you, 85% of them have no idea who Marx was or who Lenin was. No idea. These people that are supporting it, the overwhelming majority, they don't want to destroy America. There may be those pushing it that want to destroy America, but the people gravitating to it, they don't want to see America's destruction. They don't want to see the demise of America. But they're ignorant. They're ignorant of what socialism really is. They've never been taught it. And another part of the problem is because they're looking for those to acknowledge their struggles. They're looking for someone to blame. And socialism has a simple answer. It's not your fault. It's the system's fault. We have to counter that with something much stronger. But before we could do that, we need to understand something even more dangerous. What democratic socialists are actually proposing. Not the marketing, not the slogans, not what they want you to believe, not fairness and justice and all that crap. but what they actually promise to do, because their actual platform, their own words, and I promise you, once you hear it, you're going to be like, oh my goodness. It's not just an alternative political philosophy. This is a roadmap to dismantle America from within. And I'm going to explain that when we get back from a quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, if you find this episode informative, do me a favor, take 30 seconds, write a good review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, give the podcast a 5-star rating, share the episode with others and on social media. It's how we grow the audience here. It's how we begin to convince other people that socialism is not the way to go. Not by mocking them, not by making fun of them, not by calling them names, but by explaining what socialism actually is. By explaining what these so-called Democratic Socialists actually believe. And that's why I'm going to use their own words, not Professor Giordano's words, because I want to talk about their actual platform, their documents, their goals. It's out there. You can find them. And when you hear them, it becomes abundantly clear that what the Democratic Socialists want is nothing less than a complete restructuring of American society, a complete dismantling of the constitutional system that we live under. They want the centralization of not just economic power, but all power. And let's get into it, because their platform is control wrapped in the language of fairness, equity, and all that other nonsense. So let's start with the foundation of their ideology, economic ownership and control. And this is straight up from the Democratic Socialist of America platform: social ownership of production, such as public enterprises, worker cooperatives, or decentralized plannings. Now break that down, right? They want public ownership of the means of production. The control of the means of production is directly rooted in Marxism. That's communism right there. They may call it socialism, but what they're really pushing for is communism, because that means that private business is gone. It means you're going to nationalize industries, that the government is going to determine what the productivity levels are. Private markets, free enterprise systems, see ya. But they need to be asked directly, how exactly would the public run these institutions, right? They always claim they don't use the word government. They use public and people. Comrades, does anyone really believe that millions of workers are going to get to vote on everyday business decisions? Like, do you really believe that out there? Do you think that we really have a say in that type of system? No, it's the government that runs it. The bureaucracy runs it. The activists in power run it. You can't have social ownership without state ownership, without government control. Why? Because if everyone participated in the decision-making process of every single business decision that needed to be made, that would create a system that's totally based in anarchy. Couldn't possibly work. But it actually gets worse, because the DSA platform continues that, quote, collectively own the key economic drivers such as energy, production, and transportation. So let's translate that. Energy grid, put it under government control. Oil and gas, nationalize or force the state into cooperatives. When it comes to airlines, freight, shipping, centrally controlled by the government. So remember in the last segment, when I asked the question, do these sound like the Scandinavian and Nordic nations? Does Sweden do this? Does Denmark do this? No, they don't have these policies. Now, if you guessed Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea, well, then you're right. Those are the countries that have these types of policies. No European country, they claim, has ever proposed anything this radical. But what the Democratic Socialists of America do, and what I'm glad they do, because they're honest at least, they openly admit the end goal is to abolish capitalism. They claim, quote, we just want a fairer economy. And right after that, they go on to say, direct quote, we advocate for the abolition of capitalism. They're not talking about or proposing reform. They want to see capitalism destroyed. So what they're really talking about isn't some Nordic-style capitalism. They want to replace the entire American economic structure with a system of central planning that's managed by the state and that's collectivist in its nature. And this is the part that they never get pushed back on. They never get debated with. It's front and center in their documents. Why not ask them about that? When we look at the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal is not something, oh, well, that was done by AOC in, I don't know, 2018 or 2019, whatever year it was. That this is still a prominent piece of legislation that they want to continue to push. You have a lot of members of Congress. And I'm not talking about the self-declared Democratic Socialists of Congress. I'm not talking about the AOCs, the Bernie Sanders, the Ed Markeys, the Ilhan Omars. There are many Democrats, ones that are considered mainstream, that support the Green New Deal. But what does the Green New Deal actually do? And if you look on the DCA's website, because this ties directly into their economic goals, they claim it's about the environment. But when you read the text, when you begin to go through the legislation that AOC proposed and the text on the DSA website, you find that the overwhelming majority of it has nothing to do with the environment at all. It's all about economic restructuring and redistribution. We see provisions like decarbonize the economy within a decade. That alone destroys entire industries overnight. Government seizing control of them. But it goes further. They want the government to ensure the public receives appropriate ownership stakes and returns on investment. Think about that. Who determines the public ownership? I mean, who writes the checks? Who decides the returns? Well, only one entity could do that, the government. They want to direct investments to spur economic development. We directed enough investments in education. That didn't work out for us. The market doesn't decide where investment goes. Government does under the central planning system. This one I love. Guarantee a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, retirement security to all people. How can you guarantee a job? Especially if someone doesn't want to work. Someone doesn't want to put in effort. You can't guarantee a job unless you control employers or you become the employer. Either option requires massive government control over the economy. And then once you do that, well, what does it really mean? For those that don't feel like working, they're going to get taken care of within the system. Interesting how it works. Guarantee a job. Doesn't matter about performance or anything like that. Then you look at, they want to guarantee all people high-quality health care, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, economic security, healthy food, clean water, clean air, access to nature. Think about what all this means. What it means is you're dependent. You're dependent on government for housing. You're dependent on government for food. You're dependent on government for economic security. You're dependent on government for health care. How are you free? Answer me that question. How are you free if you're beholden to the state for survival? How are you free? You're not going to be able to bite the hand that feeds you. And when that hand controls your entire life, that's not fairness. That's not equality. That's dependency. Understand, there can be no guarantees in life. None. But people are going to buy into it. And let's look at that word democratic. They use that as a shield. They say, we're just putting people first. That's what we're doing. They make it sound so innocent. But it doesn't mean you're putting people first. It means you're putting government first. You put government above everything. There is no higher entity in a socialist system than the state. The state is the highest and most important entity. And I'll give you clear examples. Public housing for all. They want public housing for all. This would require the repeal of the Fair Cloth Amendment. What does that mean? It means unlimited federal construction of public housing or state and local construction, depending on where you're at. Centralized planning of the housing supply, control over entire communities. Are you aware that Mamdani is proposing this? Are you aware that there was legislation in New York City Council that was pushed through that actually does this? If you listen to the chatter, but too many people don't pay attention, but if you listen to the chatter, New York City socialists say, well, there are a lot of businesses that are being unoccupied, right? You have these massive, massive buildings. Businesses have left since the coronavirus. They became wise and realized that they could save themselves tons of money. And so now we have a lot of empty office space. And sooner or later, the owners, the landlords on those buildings, if they're not making money, they're going to lose those buildings. It's either going to be seized by the bank or the landlord's just going to give the key and tell the banks to take it. And that's where the government comes in, right? We have these high rents throughout the city. We have empty office space, so let's just convert the office space into rental units. And so government will be controlling the supply and demand of housing. It becomes an arm of the government. That's communism. That's not socialism. Another chilling aspect to their platform. They want control over the media. Again, direct quote from DSA document. Quote, public resources would be devoted to the development of a genuinely free press and a democratically administered mass media. What the hell does a democratically administered mass media means? Who administers it? Who decides what is free? Who controls the narrative? Well, there's only one that could, right? And if you guess the government, you'd be correct. So let that sink in, because the First Amendment exists for one purpose: to prevent the government from controlling the press, to prevent the government from controlling speech. And the Democratic Socialists want to reverse that. They don't want you to have a free press. They want to be able to control what you can see, what you can hear. They want to control the thoughts and ideas you have. This is authoritarianism that's wrapped in soft language. They also don't want an education system rooted in knowledge, intellectual growth, and the ability to think critically. And that much, I think they kind of succeeded in, right? They want to focus on political indoctrination, and they kind of succeeded. We have to give them that. But when you read their documents, it's actually terrifying, because in one document, the Democratic Socialists of America, that they talk about why socialists should become teachers. And they openly describe teaching as a political project. They say, quote, it's a strategic means to shape the militancy and ideology of the youth. Again, this is not hidden. It's not implied. It's openly stated. Their goal is to capture each generation from within the classroom. And they're doing it. And it's not just the K through 12 system. It's happening in higher ed too. And then they want to offer free college to everyone. Let's put more people through these failed institutions. They want to pitch it as European-style fairness. But again, this is not Europe. And look at the OECD data. The United States has a post-secondary attainment rate of 46%. Germany has free college, and their attainment rate's only at 28%. Italy's lower. Free college does not increase completion. In fact, the opposite tends to be true. Why? Because when you're investing your own money, you're investing in yourself. You value the education more. And what the Democratic Socialists never tell young people, in countries with state-funded higher ed, free college, the government will determine what you're majoring in. They're going to give you a career aptitude test, and then they're going to tell you what degree the state's going to fund. If you want a different major, they'll say, fine, you could have a different major. Just go to a private school, and you're going to have to pay for it yourself. Now, think about that. That is the opposite of freedom. That is the opposite of the pursuit of happiness. Imagine the government telling you, no, you can't study law. We have too many lawyers already. Why are we going to pay for you to become a lawyer too? So we're going to put you in mechanical engineering. That's central planning within the education system. End game simple. Control society. Whether it's intended or not, that's what you get. When you put it all together, government control of production, government control of energy, government control of transportation, government control of housing, government control of media, government control of education, government control of labor, healthcare, economic security, you name it. It's a system where government controls every aspect of your life, your job, your food, your home, your healthcare, your information, your economic future, your voice. That's not compatible with our republic. That is not freedom. That is not fairness. That is authoritarianism that is being pushed, and it's disguised as being moral and righteous. People have to understand, Democratic Socialists, they believe they're morally superior. They believe they know what's best for society, what's best for you and your family better than you do yourself. They believe they should be the ones to dictate how the economy functions. They should be the ones that control the institutions. And if you disagree with them, they're not going to argue on the merits. They're going to smear you as racist, sexist, bigot, you're a fascist. Anything that delegitimizes you, that dehumanizes you. This is why dissent is always crushed under socialism. They cannot tolerate disagreement because disagreement challenges their moral authority. And I will say it plainly. Principles of democracy and socialism cannot coexist together. One is built on freedom, the other is built on control. One is built on choice, the other is built on coercion. One is built on personal responsibility, the other is built on centralized authority. Most Americans that are actually embracing socialism don't know any of this. They've never read the platform. They've never seen the quotes. They don't understand what socialism actually is. The vast majority that say they support socialism never attended the Democratic Socialists of America party meeting. They have no idea that it's failed everywhere it's been tried. They don't know that. And Republicans tend to assume they know that, but they don't know that. They don't realize they're being sold a lie that preys on their misery, a lie that preys on hopelessness, a lie that preys on economic anxiety. So let's be honest. That's what socialism brings. And when they talk about equity, you'll get equity. You will get equity. Equity in misery, suffering, hopelessness. But Republicans can counter this. Not with insults, not with pointing to the past and with nostalgia. But they need to come up with a clear and compelling narrative, a clear and compelling conservative vision that's rooted in freedom, prosperity, opportunity, and responsibility. And that's where I'm going to go in next Monday's episode. So you are going to want to tune in because I am going to break it all down for you and put together what Republicans should be doing. Lay out the conservative market-based solutions that will actually fix the problems. A lot of people always ask, what does P.A.S. stand for? Politics, analysis, solutions. I will give you the solutions without destroying our freedom and handing control to the government. Now, I want to wish each and every one of you out there, I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. I will be putting out an episode on Wednesday. It's going to be an America's Founding Series episode, so you're going to want to check it out. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. Safe travels to everyone out there, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.